So yeah, I'm very excited to introduce the next session. It's about engineering a safe and sustainable ocean. So it's really about ocean infrastructure and how we can build safety and sustainability into ocean sustainability. This is a sponsored session by the Lloyd's Register Foundation. So it's really about a just transition, and we all know we have these transitions going on to kind of low carbon, sustainable ocean economy, and obviously we need investment for that, we need education, we need infrastructure, we need innovation, and really to creating kind of decent and safe jobs in the ocean economy. So in this session, we really explore the commitments and also the investment that is required to address some of those barriers and opportunities for engineering a safe and sustainable ocean. So I'm very excited to introduce the panelists for this session. So first of all, we have Alexander Doche. He is Chief Strategy Officer and founder at ORG Permanent Modernity. Please join me on the stage. And then we have Jan Prstatek. He's Director of Technologies at Lloyd's Register Foundation. We have Oriana Romano. She is Head of Unit at Water Governance and Circular Economy at the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Cities and Regions at the OECD. Alisa Cranes. She's Head of Ports and Shipping at C40 Cities. And last but not least, Anna Ulanovsky. She's Ports and Maritime Leader at Arup. So thanks very much for joining. Do we have...
We have to share.
Yeah, I think we have to share. I'm going to sit here at the corner. I don't know, are we going to add another chair? Or?
We say...
It's always good to have a good group of people. It's also good to have the right number of chairs. Right?
I believe there's one coming up.
It's a good icebreaker.
Exactly. Also, actually, when I work from home, I always use a standing desk because it's so much healthier, and it's good for your back and everything. Maybe we should do a standing session. That would be really good for our health. Amazing. Thanks so much. Great. Join forces. We made it.
All right.
Amazing. So now we can finally take a seat in unison. Brilliant. So great to have you all with us. So the session was really about how can we build a sustainable and safe ocean, how we can build infrastructure in a way that embeds safety and sustainability. So of course we want to talk about why this is so important and also why now, and also how can we work better together. I mean, how can we work better together on infrastructure projects to make that a reality? And what kind of impact metrics and measurements are required to build a safe and sustainable ocean? And finally, if we do have time, and please, send your questions through the Slido, as well as in the room as well. If you have questions, we're going to have lots of opportunities for questions and answers. Hopefully, we'll have a time just to talk about the culture shift required as well to build safety and sustainability into ocean infrastructure. So I want to start with Alexander in terms of how can we actually start kind of embedding infrastructure that is safe and sustainable. You're the Chief Strategy Officer of ORG, a design agency and think tank that works internationally on urbanism, architecture, large-scale systems transformation as well. So very important and relevant topics when it comes to infrastructure for the ocean. So why is there this growing need to engineer a safe and sustainable ocean economy?
Well, I mean, there is a need we're in the middle of a transition. We're not even at the beginning anymore. We're in the middle of a transition. We do need large transformative projects that engage infrastructure and services of our territory, in land or in water, to help us survive together. The ocean and our blue surface needs to play a much bigger role in that than we've hitherto thought. Now, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be deeply ecologically just and well thought through, but there are services that our ocean will need to deliver from an energy, from a biodiversity, from a carbon capture point of view, and we will activate it more and more. So just to give this some context, a number of years ago, I was an academic, and I built a center at MIT called the Center for Advanced Urbanism. And it was great. We were trying to attack issues that the market didn't have ready-made solutions for. So we brought amazing academics at MIT together, think through solutions. But ultimately, as an academic, you're bound to do research. And so what we saw, the facts, the figures, the evolution of the last 20, 30, 40 years, staggering. But you're condemned. We have the privilege of doing research about that. So I someone said, I can't take it. So I left and built an organization outside of the university which can take risks. And so what we're now doing is with about 100 people in New York and Brussels, we're at the service of institutions and investors that want to do big, strategic, system change projects globally. And not just conceiving, but especially also implementing.
Yeah. And is that, I mean, the systems change angle is really important. Yesterday we discussed that as well in the context of, blue carbon, actually getting blue finance going, and it's very much applicable to building infrastructure in a safe and sustainable way as well. And obviously, Jan, at the Lloyd's Register Foundation, you have led projects that provide, safety perspective on current but also future engineering and supply chain activities. So how can we, in your view, how can we start to kind of embed safety into ocean infrastructure projects, and why is this so important?
Okay, thanks. I think my answer to that is starting with what we're looking to build. So we're looking at something like $90 trillion worth of infrastructure being put in and around the oceans over the next decade. And this is stuff. This is things we can touch and feel, and we shouldn't forget that a lot of this investment is about building things that are real structures, real things we can see and feel. And we want to make sure that it's safe and sustainable. And there's kind of three things in my mind which are quite key here. So the first one is about, we're looking at complex systems. So we need to bring everybody together that understands that complex system. So it's not only the usual suspects, so you've got to have your investors in there, you've got to have your governments, your intergovernment agencies, your industries, your local communities, and don't forget the engineers. They've got to build this because they need to understand what they're building for. You leave them alone, they'll go off and build what they want, but it needs to be fit for its purpose. Also, secondly, we want to scale. We need to scale these things. So how do we scale this infrastructure safely? When we talk about scaling, it's going to happen in different places at different times. It's going to need standardization. If we look at how do we look at nature-based engineering and how do we make sure that what's being applied in the right way, in the right places, globally. And I think the final thing, final thought in this space is around the people. And we can't underestimate the importance of people involved in making this infrastructure safe and sustainable. And that talks through the whole spectrum of people. It starts with the lawyers and the regulators that are going to make the space and make the area we can work in. And it goes through to the engineers. It goes through to the people that are going to operate and maintain this equipment. There's a whole raft of people that are important to embed safety and build safety and work safely as well.
Yeah, great points as well. I mean, often when we talk about the ocean economy, we either think about, there's all this water, all this kind of seagrass and all these sea animals, but we came out of the ocean as well as humans, and 70% of the planet is the ocean. Every second breath we take is the ocean. So it's actually so important to have this people-centered approach. And you also mentioned the importance of scale and the complex system that you also mentioned. So it's important to make sure that within a complex system you create that kind of, that safety and sustainability at the heart of it. So I'd also like to ask Oriana in terms of, obviously you have led lots of projects at the OECD in terms of, cities, blue economy, as well as, of course, water governance, which is the department that you run. So how is embedding safety and sustainability in ocean infrastructure important in your work?
Thank you. So, as you said, I work at the OECD, so I would respond from an economic perspective. I'm an economist, I'm not an engineer, so I can't say much about the technicalities of infrastructure, of course, but we are now studying the blue economy in cities and regions, so with many cities all around the world, more than 50 at the moment, but the study is still running. And while thinking about the subject, we came up with 3 types of infrastructure within the blue economy in cities. The first is infrastructure to protect, because if we want the blue economy to flourish and also to let's say also to provide the non-marketed benefit. So in relation to an ecosystem, we cannot just look into grey infrastructure, but also to nature-based infrastructure. And there are many nature-based solutions, and there are many cities that are actually including in blue economy strategies or initiatives, for example, projects related to mangroves, a coral reef, really to protect the coast against the coastal erosions. This is one type that really connects the blue economy and the water security, because of course a city that is flooded cannot be a city where the economy can flourish. The second type of infrastructure to innovate, to experiment. We have seen that many cities, for example, provide infrastructure like literally hubs, places where startups can meet, can exchange, can experiment, can determine the impact of their experimentation. And this is related to the previous point, they can scale up. But first there is a piloting phase. And in many instances, for example, Barcelona, we heard before, is one of the examples that provide this type of infrastructure to experiment. And the last type of infrastructure is probably something that is still still ongoing. Is the infrastructure towards the new type of blue economy, a blue economy that is not only sustainable, but is also, for example, circular. There are many applications that can be done within the shipping sector, the port sector, the tourism sector, and all this depends on infrastructure. So really ports, for example, how they can increase the circularity of the type of activities, but also in terms of the value chain in which they are implied for the blue economy activities.
Yeah. Great. I mean, those three dimensions are absolutely vital, and they're all interconnected, as you said, in terms of the production services that is important in terms of infrastructure, but also the opportunity to innovate in those kind of hubs. And cities are great places to innovate, as you said, but also the opportunities that we have from building these kind of new types of opportunities from the blue economy. And of course, this source to sea approach, where you have the circular economy approach embedded within the blue economy, is absolutely vital. And Anna is what I wanted to ask about your work at Arup, and you're a project manager for many kind of multidisciplinary projects. I mean, what is your take on the role of safety and sustainability when it comes to ocean infrastructure? Oh, you swapped.
It's okay. So I've really enjoyed being here today. It's been great to listen to lots of different panelists giving their experience in this field. It's made me reflect about my role as an engineer. I'm a civil engineer. I work for an organization where shaping a better world has always been our mission. And embedding sustainability in the past in maritime projects have sometimes been a bit of an uphill battle. In our clients often saw sustainability as an add-on. And I've seen a real shift, though, in this last few years, since I came back from maternity leave. There's been a real shift from our clients looking at sustainability, and I think it's been due to climate action, which is something we've really heard today. So it's great to see. And from our perspective, we think that for oceans to continue to support that 90% of global trade, we need to work on holistic solutions, like some of my colleagues have just said, to meet those engineering challenges, because they are complex. So, for example, we believe ports can be catalysts for green ocean connectivity. They must and they can influence the solutions that we've been talking today around, for example, type of fuel, because the infrastructure readily available close to the port will probably limit what type of fuel they can actually offer. And we've found that framing the solutions via resilience lens is working really well. So looking at the resilient supply chain allows us to engage the wider stakeholders in a common objective and actually really challenge those true project requirements through a wider lens than what we've done before. Mm-hmm. And this may involve rethinking operations and size of vessels, as well as the infrastructure provision at the port. It may also involve carefully considering what to invest when in terms of adaptation. And it has to involve careful consideration of the local natural ecosystem. There's a real drive now for net gain, which we're seeing in our design projects, and that's fantastic. And I think that discussion that's been had today, a number of debates around more data, that's something we find in terms of designing nature-based solutions, and also, shifting what materials we use in construction, in maritime, needs a lot of sharing of data and research between different organizations.
Great points. I mean, that mindset shift in terms of designing differently. And you mentioned also the circular economy, and the design stage is absolutely vital. Also, these kind of wider stakeholder engagements are absolutely critical. And infrastructure often, is an opportunity to rally around, the whole value chain. So that's all, very critical. And finally, Alisa, I mean, you lead C40's ports and shipping program. And from your experience, how can safety and sustainability really kind of be embedded within ocean infrastructure?
Yeah, so I'll give you a very brief answer. So we're focused on decarbonizing shipping, and we're working on a number of green shipping corridor initiatives, which we convene and incubate. And so one thing that comes to mind immediately is that shipping sector has a very clear science-based decarbonization goal of having 5% scalable zero-emission fuels by 2030, which means all vessels that transport our goods on planet Earth by 2030 have to run 5% on green fuels. In order for that transition to happen, there has to be a workforce that can power this transition, that knows how to handle these fuels, that knows how to handle and manage these new technologies both on land and on board of a ship. So as we are churning this amazing ambition into action and launching these amazing cross-collaborative projects around the world to decarbonize shipping, we really have to start thinking hard of how we're looking at preparing our workforce to handle these new requirements. So that's my thought for now. I want to be brief to make sure we have time to discuss other things.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's also about, being to your point earlier about the green fuels. This is all that just shows to what extent infrastructure is embedded within the whole decarbonization conversation in other sectors as well. When we think about infrastructure, I mean port infrastructure, but also in cities and land. So that's a really great point. And all of you, in a way, touched upon the need to build, these connections with these wider stakeholders and building these coalitions around it, because infrastructure is just, in a way, it's like a tool, but it connects people, it connects cities, it connects stakeholders within the ocean economy. So how can we build those kind of coalitions to, really build safe and sustainable infrastructure? So, Alisa, you just mentioned, the importance of great fuels, and obviously you work a lot in cities and ports, working with other stakeholders, national governments, of course, labor organization, industry. So how do you build these kind of coalitions? And I mean, by nature, C40 is a coalition, right, of cities. So what is your best practice of building these coalitions around, really rallying around safety and sustainability when it comes to infrastructure?
Well, I think I'll speak to these coalitions that are specific to decarbonizing shipping, because there are certainly other coalitions that C40 is accelerating and advancing and building. But as it applies to ocean, as it applies to shipping and ports and cities, the coalitions we're building are creating green shipping corridors, which is a way to turn ambition into action. It's a way to turn public-private collaboration into something that's tangible. It's a way to take something that's really complex, supply chains, which are very, very complex. They involve ports, they involve cities, they involve shipping companies, cargo owners, all of us consumers who buy things at a store or online. How do you take all that and turn it into something that's tangible, where we can actually show how we achieve the goals, set joint goals, achieve them together, and show action behind these commitments? So these are the coalitions that we've been building, and we find that the real key ingredient to success in these coalitions is cross-value chain collaboration. And I know collaboration has been like the key word of the summit. It gets mentioned in every single panel discussion, be that about finance or be that about plastic or blue economy. But it really is a key ingredient in how to make a successful green shipping corridor. And so in our experience, in bringing together public and private sector actors, entities that usually compete with each other, and sometimes never work with each other, like city governments and shipping lines and cargo owners, and bringing them all together under one umbrella, getting them to agree on what they're going to do, how they're going to do, and what are the specific steps they're going to take together. That's been a really valuable experience for us. And obviously, safety and sustainability go hand in hand. So, all these actors need to be working together to make sure that sustainability planning is aligned with planning for workforce training and other safety requirements.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's basically two sides of the same coin, safety. So you can't build sustainable infrastructure without having safety in mind, and vice versa. And that value chain approach that you mentioned, that comes up a lot, but it's not surprising that it comes up a lot because, as we said, there is like a real push to integrate, land-based cities and, the wider economy into the ocean discussion. And that is really, the value chain conversation is a way to do that because, the EU taxonomy has now included biodiversity and circular economy into sustainable activities, and you can't ignore the ocean anymore, even if you don't have a direct impact on the ocean. So great points on that cross-value chain. I mean, Anna, your work is in a way also focusing on ports in a way and resilient supply chains, right? Which by nature require coalitions as well. So what are your best practices in terms of kind of building these partnerships that we need in the infrastructure space?
So, for example, at the minute we're working in partnership with Resilience Rising and the UN Climate Champions to meet the maritime breakthrough targets they announced at COP27. So what we're doing is we're having a number of roundtables with people from across the industry in some events across the year like this one on maritime and oceans to discuss a little bit the framework we've been pulling together to look at master planning of ports through a resilience lens. And then we're going to be holding with stakeholders, which we hope we're going to meet during these roundtables come September. We're actually going to be working on a toolkit for the application of resilience in port master planning.
And those are the exact examples of bringing those different people together. It's kind of these kind of coalitions that we mentioned, the stakeholder engagement. Oriana, as well, your work focuses on cities as well. So there's, in a way, that link. You all focus on the ports and cities, and of course we have also the engineering approach. But it's that it's that focus on local communities as well that matters, right? Bringing the stakeholders from those kind of vulnerable communities as well into that conversation. Obviously, as we said, cities by nature require those kind of multi-stakeholder approaches. So could you tell us a bit more about your experience at the OECD and the work that you do to building those coalitions and partnerships? You mentioned you have kind of an economic lens to it. It would be great to hear from you how you build those coalitions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. When it comes to blue economy, links to water governance, resilience, circularity, of course, there is not just one community to refer to. And even if we work with cities, the OECD being an intergovernmental organization where the main constituencies are national government, for us it's very important to create this link, even when sometimes it can be weak or maybe stronger on a certain dimension rather than other. So what we have at the OECD is the OECD Water Governance Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative of several levels of government from OECD and non-OECD countries, so it's pretty much global. You have national government, local, regionals, but you also have private sectors, public sector, universities, operators of different services. And so when it comes, for example, as in this case, where we are actually investigating on the opportunities for a resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and circular blue economy, we discuss with this community that has, of course, different point of view, different interests, different experiences, how to get there. So it's really moving from theory to implementation, is to ideas, to actions, and this diversity, so this dialogue is very much important also for government to really identify the obstacles, red tapes, and everything that is related, for example, to regulation and financing, but also to find solutions that can be implemented even when the government, for example, change colors and interest. So the implementers are definitely those that will stay, and the government becomes accountable to them.
Yeah, great points about actually working with the government and navigating those kind of challenges, but also creating that continuity, that flexibility, even when governments change. And it's that diversity of approaches and actually beneficial, because as you said earlier, there's also that human-centered approach. And if you work with those different stakeholders, you need to have that diversity of stakeholders in mind. And of course, at Lloyd's Register Foundation, Jan, you work a lot with partners across the whole the world, but also the value chain. I mean, in terms of to build that safety and sustainability into all the work that you do at LRF. So could you tell us a bit more about your approach to partnerships and some examples of how you build partnerships to catalyze this change?
Okay, so one of the biggest games in town in the marine industry at the moment is decarbonisation. And as part of the decarbonisation of shipping, we need to look at a just transition, a just and equitable transition of how jobs are going to change, new people are going to be coming into the sector. And as part of that, we were seeing how could we start to do something that will help that change happen. So we funded the UNGC to establish and do the first parts of the Just Transition Task Force. So what they've been doing is, together with the International Chamber of Shipping and the International Transport Workers Federation, they've been bringing together the community to start to understand what's needed to create a just and equitable transition in maritime. And not that long ago, they published their 10-point plan that was going to say what sorts of things need to be happening from there. And just to give the high-level summary, instead of going through all of them, but it was focusing on really how do you establish consensus on what you want to achieve. It talks about principles of how you're going to get there. So it's about global labour standards and gender and diversity and health and safety as part of that transition. It talks to the recruitment. How do we recruit seafarers? How do we give them careers that are going to last? And how do we keep them in the sector? Where will they need to be trained? So it's skills. You can't get investment into skills until you have certainty of what you're trying to achieve, what you're going to train. It talks about how we can strengthen STCW, the training requirements for seafarers. How do we change that in order to be able to enable things to change that need to change? How do we look at training? Where does the training needed? How are we going to provide it? And skills councils. So we're going to understand we have different needs in different places. So how do we establish those so they can monitor need and take action? So it's a real example of bringing the community together in order to understand a transition which has to happen safely, has to be equitable, and it's going to make a big difference. So by bringing and convening people, getting the right people together, we can come out with plans that then go forward and be actioned. And only last week, I think it was, or 2 weeks ago in Ghana, they had a meeting that was looking at the just transition, and it was starting to look at the skills councils and what you need to do to be able to move the local areas forwards.
Amazing, and those are the examples where you can take those principles, actually can apply them to local contexts as well, and where you have a real impact with that kind of convening of stakeholders. And that's, in a way, that's what we're trying to do as well, bringing different stakeholders together around those kind of common denominators and how we can build on that. And that's amazing to hear about the just transition principles, and including things like recruitment skills that are often neglected when it comes to the ocean infrastructure conversation, but also gender diversity and so on. So finally, also on this conversation around partnerships, Alexander, I mean, obviously you mentioned earlier that you have, you came from the kind of scientific and kind of academic background into this space. So in your experience, how can we build these kind of coalitions to bring the different stakeholders that we've talked about together and to really create that impact for a safe and more sustainable ocean?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally everything about the success of a project depends on that. I mean, if you look at the global statistics, within the democratic world at large, globally speaking, 70% of infrastructure projects, which are mostly today in service of, or should be in service of some kind of sustainable goal, but 70% of our big projects fail and they fail with long delays or cancellations or huge cost overruns. And almost always, the reason for that failure or that huge delay or cost overrun or cancellation is resistance from the environment. So, in other words, stakeholders. So the fact that people around the project, it could be funders, it could be people living nearby or overlooking it, or it could be an environmental action committee, it could be the local mayor. Somebody is not supportive, goes to court, ends up stopping. So this happens over and over again. And it's like we're repeating the same mistakes. So, and it's not something you can solve by saying, oh, well, let's take care of our stakeholder management and convene a few people and get them to say yes to our ideas. That's also not the solution. So what we've learned is to actually break through the impasse here, is that you want to, of course, really engage these as this broad group, from the investor to the neighbor, as equals almost, engage them, but at the same time have good mathematicians and algorithm writers that can actually analyze performance or simulated performance. So if a stakeholder says, yes, but why don't we do it not like you say, but like you say? Well, that immediately we can calculate the outcome. Well, say, look, it's a great idea, but perhaps it's not so great on this and this and that performance. So stakeholder management needs to be matched immediately with performance analysis. And that also with, again, with the third thing, design, visualizations, expertise, like, engineering, actually having something to look at so that people can judge it. So to deal with that stakeholder group, you need to integrate them from the get-go into a complex that already is quite difficult, but it is your only chance to go down from 70% failure to maybe 50, 40, 30, which is what you really would like. So I think it's a huge deal. And just to give you guys a very simple, two simple examples, if you do this right, you actually succeed in building an army of ambassadors for a difficult project. And your project will need that. As you said, it will go beyond the current legislature or the current leadership. You will need supporters and ambassadors that push your project forward even though they don't have direct stake. And so it's a chance to build community. A good big project is a chance to build community and weave fabric before you even start pouring dollars or euros into an artifice of some sort. And then a simple example, and I'll pass it because I certainly think I'm talking long enough here. But we were working on an energy island in the Belgian North Sea. So two stakeholders face to face with each other, really completely conflictuous. So one says, from the investment perspective, I just need my structure to be super straight with geometries that are as simple as possible. I do not want complexity. Complexity means cost, means potential failure during construction. I need it to be smooth, simple, clean, and long straight lines. Against it, we have a team of biodiversity experts, which unanimously are telling us, well, to make a great sub and intertidal biodiverse ecosystem here, we need complex geometry. Not simple, but as complicated as possible. So here you have a standoff of two radically opposite. And then ultimately, in the process of doing this with these stakeholders, you need to come out. And it's possible. It's always possible to come out at the other side with a consensus. But you need to go through, I wouldn't say the fight, but you need to go through the conflict first. And it's about simple versus complex as ways of looking at the world.
Yeah, great points, Alexander. It also puts into context this stakeholder engagement conversation, because it's not just about convening the stakeholders, as you said, but it's actually about building that kind of community. And for that, you also need to have those performance indicators and to visualize the success. And only by having those kind of almost like divergent approaches, you can come to kind of an agreement.
Absolutely. Well, you get a much smarter and intelligent project. Absolutely.
That's right,
Thanks
exactly.
to them.
With better outcomes and more impact, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. So we have a bit of time left for some questions. Are there any questions in the room? Yes, there's one here at the front. Please state your name and affiliation.
Yes, thank you. Frank Jesus from the European Investment Bank. I have two questions. One for Anna. With your interactions with cities and ports, what share of cities and ports you assess being ready for the consequences of climate change related to sea level rise, increase of storms, etc. I've been discussing with colleagues at the EIB, and we disagree on the fact that ports are ready or not. I'd like to have your view. And then for Jan, how do you reconcile your focus on sustainable ocean and decarbonization with the support that Lloyd's Register provide to the oil and gas offshore industry? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Anna, would you like to go first?
One of the breakthroughs that I mentioned earlier is exactly around that. I'm trying to think of the stat. I think it is 30% by 2030 of ports in cities have considered climate resilience. That's the breakthrough. So I don't know the number, but I think it's probably quite low. What happens as well is not all ports are in cities. Many ports are not in cities as well. And we often find that actually city leadership is really strong, where a port is in a city is probably better prepared than when it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point.
Okay, a great question. And I think I'd go back to what our charitable mission is, which is about enhancing safety of life and property on land, at sea, and in the air through technical standards. And really, to talk about the different sectors of the oceans and saying that they're different is wrong from our perspective, because we want everything to be safe. It doesn't matter what it is, we want all activities to be carried out safely, because the consequences of things going wrong is bad whatever the sector is. So you have to make sure that we're operating in the world which is safe, and that's where our focus is, to make sure it remains safe as possible.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks a lot. Any additional questions? I don't see a hand. I mean, there was something on the slide as well, but also something that you raised in terms of the metrics and the performance indicators are absolutely vital. So I also wanted to ask the other panelists in terms of what kind of metrics and measurements do we need to really measure the success of having embedded sustainability and safety into ocean infrastructure. You have already given a great answer to that. Who else would like to? I mean, obviously you have a lot of indicators.
I'll make a start, but I mean, you need to understand what you want your infrastructure to achieve. You need to map out what you want it to do and how it's going to get there. Because once you understand the impact you're trying to achieve, you're then able to start to plan how you get there and monitor your route to the impact. So that's where I would say is you need to identify what your impact is and then your route to get there.
Yeah, great point.
Perhaps if I may add, in the study that we are carrying out across cities and regions on the blue economy, actually we struggle to get the data. Data on impact of blue economy sectors in terms of economic growth, in terms of jobs creation, in terms of environmental benefits, a reduction of environmental negative externalities on air, on waters, or on waste production. Data may exist, but they are very much scattered across a number of sectors. They are hardly comparable across cities, so I guess the frequency of data collection, the harmonization of unit of measures and methodologies, it is an issue. And the second, I think, important, at least for what we are trying to also build in our work, is to get data on the governance aspect. If, for example, we are looking at investment or new investment in emerging sectors on the blue economy, I think it's important to also have real and quality data on the regulatory system, on the type of institutional framework, and this data do not exist. So we are, of course, trying to build them up, but it's something to have a look on.
Yeah, that's absolutely vital, that kind of macro data as well on regulatory developments, because that in a way sets the scene as well for embedding safety and sustainability into infrastructure. Alisa, do you have, I mean, obviously at C40, you kind of monitoring and evaluation is, of progress is a key element of what you do. So what is the role of impact measurement and metrics for you?
Well, I think the short answer would be that when you have a coalition that is committed to the same goals and the same actions, it's a lot easier to measure the success. So on Green Corridors, for example, we are developing clear reporting mechanisms and metrics that will be used by all partners in the corridor to measure success, to measure progress, to report on it. So when you have a partnership that is in agreement to one metric, it becomes a lot easier to do that. In terms of I wanted to pick up on one other thing. Just transition is one of the words in the description of this panel, and that's something that we are starting to think about in terms of how we work with multilaterals, for example, and international finance institutions, because a lot of our cities and our port cities are in the Global South, and it is part of our mandate to make sure that we engage with the Global South, that we are helping build capacity, not just projects. So I think as we talk about the safe and just transition, underlining the word just, I think we need to make sure we're also thinking about the Global South, and that we are able to develop a more connected capacity building program that is supported by the MDBs of the world and the IFIs of the world, the program that actually does allow us to focus on skills versus just projects, because projects will follow.
Great points about that, just transition element to it. Unfortunately, we've run out of time at this stage, but I'd really like to thank the panelists for great contribution. We heard about the need for that stakeholder management and stakeholder engagement, coalition building, but also having those performance indicators and visualizing the success and the potential success and the vision for embedding safety and sustainability into infrastructure. And of course, there's this need to have that kind of diverse stakeholders and diverse voices heard in the city context that is happening also through coalitions. And of course, we need to, really start off having this kind of value chain conversation, cross-industry collaboration, but also having the whole value chain integrated into that ocean infrastructure conversation. Thanks a lot again to the panelists. Thanks a lot for your questions. And now we are going to move on to the next panel. Thank you very much.